Long moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House Bill number 4378 be recalled from the Committee on Housing, Finance, and Policy, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I'd like to ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing more than 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an urgent issue to try to protect individuals in our community who are at risk of eviction. We are introducing House File 4378 today, which mirrors the bill that passed the Senate last week on bipartisan support, because the Senate bill was a tax vehicle, and as everyone in the House knows, House tax policy has to start in the House. So we are passing today, I hope, the identical bill to what the Senate passed last week, and I would defer to Representative Kozlowski, the author, for a description of the bill.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you, Speaker and members. I rise today with urgency to ask for this body's support for House File 4378. As many members know, that is a bill that I have presented 2 times now in housing. Every month, tens of thousands of Minnesota families get open letters that are saying the same thing. Pay your rent in 14 or 30 days or lose your home. This is the reality for far too many in our state. The bill answers a simple but urgent question that Minnesotans are asking: who will stop this from happening? This bill provides an urgent $40 million in emergency rental assistance directed out straight to counties and tribal nations and right into the hands of landlords through proven and vetted systems that already exist and work. Today, we're facing a perfect storm of working families facing a Minnesota where hardly anything is affordable anymore. For families living paycheck to paycheck, or who got a paycheck and can't even stretch it to the next paycheck, one missed shift, one medical bill, or one sudden spike in expenses means it's pushing them over the edge into potential evictions. But this bill bridges that gap. HF 4378 is a bill that targets families who are living 200% below the poverty line, prioritizing households with kids, and extends assistance back to August 25th, 2025, when we know that families started raising the alarms about the economic distress that they're enduring. Because every day a child, family, or a senior loses their home, we need this bill to ensure that they get the stability or their future is going to hang in balance. Members, we know the eviction numbers are staggering. I have numbers here in front of me, and I've recounted many times on this floor and in committees. Starting with that, in 2025, we had the highest number of evictions filed in Minnesota ever, 25,000. 25,000. And 80% of those numbers that gets an eviction filed against them end up in displacement. Across the state, 50% of renters are cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income. Calls to legal aid, Homeline, to 211 are up 60 to 115%. Many counties have already exhausted their Q2 rental assistance, and they're desperate and asking for us for assistance. A report by Kira shows that Minnesotans were already behind an estimated $50 million behind in rent, and with Operation Metro Surge, that number has been pushed and added with another $50 million. But I want to bring us back to that on any single night in Minnesota, over 8,000 Minnesotans are living outdoors. Native American children, youth, and elders being 12 to 30 times more likely to be the ones who are outdoors. In greater Minnesota, where I represent and our co-chair Igo is, we heard last week about how 53% of our shelters saw increases. They're brimming. They're having to turn people away. And I'll tell you, with the cold weather that came, we can only wonder what folks ended up doing. We know, we don't have to wonder actually, because from your district to mine, I know that a third of them come and they ended up not being able to continue on with their life. A third of homeless people that died last year, over 115, came from our district, yours and mine. And we took issue on this just last week. Remember, you repurposed nearly $10 million for the COCs to make sure that folks had a place to call home and get the money out to the backbone. And these are the same providers, the same budget neutral solution is passing this $40 million lifeline. That's not just dollars, it's not just a policy, it is a lifeboat to Minnesotans. They are in crisis, not just one reason. Members, food insecurity is rising. We've heard story after story. SNAP cuts are stretching food shelves. Healthcare is increasingly unaffordable. Raises in prices from 80 to 200%. Tariffs that are hitting households and farmers, especially soybean farmers. Tariffs are costing Minnesotans $1,700 already. And our economy is under strain. Utilities is a big part of this bill, and tribal nations have asked for that because we know that there's already 80,000 Minnesotans who had their utilities cut off. And every day, the prices keep rising. Through no fault of their own, no single factor that caused this crisis, but here we are, 6 out of 10 households living paycheck to paycheck. These are people who are working multiple jobs, 2 and 3 jobs, just trying to stay afloat. And the only reason that we're not in an even worse off situation now is because of Minnesotans. A community care alone cannot meet this scale. Government must act. And so that is why we are here declaring with urgency, let's do what the Senate did last Wednesday. They passed this bill off the Senate floor with bipartisan support, and we can do the same. Members, I urge you to vote green and keep Minnesotans home, keep them safe, and keep them healthy, and keep landlords whole.
Further discussion to the motion. I recognize the member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the motion in front of us today, I'm going to encourage a no vote on the urgency. This issue has been one that's been being talked about in the Housing Committee a lot, but I want to put some facts out there about why we're taking some time to make sure we get this right. The first being where the money's coming from. This is $40 million left over in the Tyler settlement. Those that are familiar with that issue, there's actually another issue moving at the U.S. Supreme Court right now that could result in these funds being utilized again to our counties and local governments to adjust and make these settlements. So I think it would be in a bad idea right now to be expending those funds when we aren't sure if we're going to need them, and we'll have that answer soon. The second being the precedent it sets when we do emergency funding. We don't want to create a standard of continuing to move forward money that becomes set in perpetuity on the backs of taxpayers. Also, the other thing I want to point out is data. So over the last couple weeks, I've made sure to look up the data on the eviction filings and kind of seeing where we're at and seeing where rent pay is coming in. If you compare March of 2025 to March of 2026, the percentage that rent has came in has remained the exact same at 96.3% for the metropolitan area, including Rochester and St. Cloud. In St. Paul alone, 2025 to 2026, it is still at 97.1% of rents collected on time. So that data right there, yes, and as co-chair of housing, I understand the emergencies and the concerns of people that go through hard times, but leveling at the level of emergency where we say we need $40 million, we need it right now, I don't see the urgency in that. One of the things that was talked about is returning affordability so we can make sure to keep people's cost of living down. Well, that's something that I firmly believe in, and that's the way that this chamber can come together to make sure we deliver the assistance to every single Minnesota family, regardless of where you are in the state. Because the fact of the matter is we're one of the highest tax states in the nation. We have the 7th highest energy prices, and our costs of goods are directly related to policies that have been put in place in years past. That is now catching up to us in the year 2026, and to fix that problem now, we come together as a legislature and pass tax relief and fix the fraud here in the state of Minnesota. Members, vote no on this motion.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Abaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I rise today in support of this motion to suspend the rules to bring up House File 4378. We are in an emergency situation. With the rent coming due in about 2 weeks, and people are already behind on rent, particularly because of ICE activity across the state, but just because we do know that in Minnesota, people are not able to keep up with the rising costs that they have to live their lives. There's a mom in her mid-40s. She lives in Lake Elmo. Her husband and adult son were laid off because of Operation Metro Surge. Their 3-income household went down to 1. They temporarily had to leave their home and stayed with family because at that time, ICE was going door to door in their neighborhood without warrants and detaining people. Now that they are back in their home, she works 7 days a week to close that gap And after scraping by to cover February's rent, they were not able to pay March. The substance of this bill has been discussed in committee multiple times, and the first time that we heard this bill, we heard that the bill needed to be budget neutral because we didn't have the February forecast yet. So we waited for the February forecast. But as we waited, we searched to see if we could find unused resources. And that's when people looked into the Tyler settlement. And this body has already allocated a settlement fund to make the people whose surplus assets that were seized after a tax forfeiture case whole. Those claims have already been filed, and from what we understand, the $40 million remaining will likely not go to any additional people. And I'll talk a little bit about this Tyler case so you know the funds that we're taking from. It was a case that was started by Geraldine Tyler, a 94-year-old black woman who had her property sold by the county to pay outstanding property taxes. But in that sale, they kept the excess proceeds without allowing her an opportunity to use the excess in a way that she would like. So even after being denied at the District Court and the 8th Court of Appeals, she finally prevailed at the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of years ago. There, the court sided with her that her extra proceeds should have been returned to her. And so just as Ms. Tyler found that strength to carry her case all the way to the top, we have an opportunity here to ensure that this bill, under this motion, can be acted on and moved to the governor's office to help others in other housing types of situations so they can stay in their homes. What we know is that when we presented this opportunity for funding, the goalpost shifted again. Then it was we hadn't seen the governor's budget. Then it was we needed to see targets. But essentially at every time that we've been able to pursue rental assistance, we have been met with resistance. And I hope today, colleagues, that we will not see that resistance any longer for people who are suffering across the state of Minnesota. There's also another piece in this bill that suspending the rules would be helpful to bring up because not only does it provide the necessary resources to ensure that renters and landlords are made whole, because let's not forget, this funding is going directly to landlords. But it also allows the time for that process to be completed. Right now in the state of Minnesota, we have a 14-day eviction notice period, and this bill would extend that into a 30-day notice period, but only temporarily, and it's only specific to non-payment of rent cases. Because we know that even in more normal circumstances, even without the ICE invasion, NGOs, government entities, and other organizations take time to move that rent from their funding to the landlords. And so this would allow us to do that. I support suspending the rules today to move rental assistance out the door and support Minnesotans who have had to make the difficult choice, which is actually no choice at all, but whether they make the choice to go to work and get at risk of being kidnapped and being taken away from their families, or do they stay at home to try to keep their families safe? So members, I urge yes on this motion to suspend the rules.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I too rise in support of this urgency. But what I want to say for starters is I'm not going to ask for your vote. I am going to ask for your curiosity to listen to the real stories that are happening in my community and those all across the state. And before I share a story from my district, I appreciate Co-Chair Igo's comments, but I wanted to mention a few things about the data. One is we don't have complete data across the state, but when you hear anecdotally what's happening in our communities, it is very true that people are under siege and we're seeing a huge explosion of need. A lot of the metrics tracked by folks like Homeline, the Tenant Hotline, and Greater Twin Cities United Way show 150, 200% increase in call volume. So the need is real, and the evictions perhaps have been blunted, but it's been by the generosity of Minnesotans standing up for their neighbors, donating millions of dollars to help people stay in their home. But that simply is not sustainable. Members, it's been raised a number of times as we've fought for emergency rental assistance, this notion that perhaps we shouldn't provide this assistance because people made the choice to stay home and not work, and we should not reward that. And to that, I want to share a story from my community in Richfield. In January, on a cold winter morning, a family of 4 woke up in their apartment complex. A mother and father who had a son and a daughter. ICE had somehow made their way into that apartment, and it was a chaotic scene. This mother and father both are here legally. No criminal record, have worked for years with kids that went to school in our community. In the chaos, the mother and the daughter were detained by ICE, and the father and the son did not. For most of that day, the family was searching, wondering where their mother and daughter had been, and before the night's end, they had already been sent to Texas. That father was the sole breadwinner for their family and was confronted with the choice, should I go to work or should I stay home with my son? And I want you to imagine in that room, that son breaking down in tears, begging his father not to go to work because he'd already lost his mom and he could not fathom losing his dad. And I just want you to put yourself in that room. What would you do? What would you say to your son? If you're in that room, what would you say to that father? What kind of choice is that? It is no choice at all. I fully appreciate that we have differences of opinion, many differences of opinions on federal immigration policy, amongst other things. But can we start by acknowledging families like that one that have played by the rules, that are sending their kids to our schools, do not deserve to experience such pain and trauma? Can we agree that families like that should not lose their home as well? I hope so, and I really, really hope so, that we can find that place and then take that next step to do something about it. Members, over the weekend, we had a big snowstorm. And a familiar scene played out in neighborhoods far and wide. You got out your snowblower or your snow shovel and you shoveled your driveway, but then you looked to your neighbors. And if your street was anything like mine, you kept at it until everyone's driveway was plowed out. And while I was doing that work alongside my neighbors, it just dawned on me just how unsurprising it is that Minnesotans have responded the way they have amidst Operation Metro Surge. It is just so ingrained in us to care deeply for our neighbors. That's who we are. And so, members, on this vote and in our work for the rest of the session, let's take a cue from Minnesotans. Let's pick up our shovels and stay at it till everyone is shoveled out. And in that vein, vote yes on this emergency for statewide emergency rental assistance. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. There's a number of reasons why we should not be voting for this urgency or for this bill. I liken it to soiling your pants and changing your shirt. We just eliminated housing stabilization services under the premise that there was fraud ridden throughout that program. And now we have another bill, another law that if passed would be another avenue for fraud. Imagine that. We have $66 million that was spent last year in the Bring It Home program, $36 million of which is still sitting dormant without an RFP award that's been sent out. Why aren't we using that money? And why are we allowing for community-based nonprofit organizations to administer these grants, the same ones that were engaging in all of that fraud? It is absolutely incredible to me how often we'll hear affordability and then follow that up with a solution that does nothing other than spend more money with nonprofits who are not accountable and who have been engaging in that fraud. When instead, we could just cut taxes on these people. Stop stealing them blind. If Minnesota did that, we wouldn't have 6 out of 10 households living paycheck to paycheck. Thank you. Vote no.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Mamani Hitsley.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker and the members, for the opportunity to speak on this matter. As a legislator, I have seen firsthand how ICE enforcement has destabilized families across our state when the breadwinner disappears overnight and income is suddenly lost, the first bill that often goes unpaid is rent. And housing instability follows quickly. In the wealthiest nation in the world, and here in Minnesota, no family should lose their home because of one emergency or one missed paycheck. This bill is not just an emergency rental assistance bill. It is an economic stabilization tool because evictions cost everyone, and it costs more. Counties pay more for shelters, schools face disruptions, employers lose workers, and communities lose stability. But when we intervene early with targeted one-time assistance, we keep families housed, children in their schools, and workers on the job. From Brooklyn Park all the way to rural Minnesota, communities where one eviction can mean leaving a town entirely. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the advocacy groups who have been on the front line of this issue, who have seen the impact firsthand as they continue to try to address the increase of phone calls, as we've heard, and this need. In my district alone, I'm thankful for local trusted partners and advocacy partners like Nalima and the team at ACER and CAPI that have helped many families I have personally referred to. There are safeguards in place to prevent fraud, as my colleague has stated, and ensure accountability for this. This bill has already passed the Senate floor. It's time for the House to follow suit and do the right thing for all Minnesotans. Emergency rental assistance is not just about, it's not a handout. It's a bridge that keeps families housed, keeps families stable, communities strong, and our economy moving forward. So I urge a vote, support on this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion? I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I urge a no vote on the motion to suspend the rules to pass this bill to spend another $40 million of our tax dollars. Minnesotans, as night follows day, Minnesota Democrats propose funding a new program for fraud. On the very same day that this body voted to remove the failed housing stabilization program from statute, the failed Democrat fraud program, we're now being asked to rush through another housing spending program at a time when fraud is running rampant in our state government. We should not be asking hardworking taxpayers to fund a new program that has the same warning signs that fraudsters are looking for. In the other body, there were reasonable efforts to improve this bill, not to fix this bill, but just to make it a little bit more palatable for working, everyday Minnesotans. Amendments were offered that would limit eligibility to U.S. citizens and legal residents. Efforts were made to prevent payments from going to individuals on the predatory offender registry. And the other body, Democrats, rejected those changes. Instead of accepting those common sense safeguards, this proposal would double down on the same approach that has contributed to Minnesota's fraud crisis: rushed spending, weak oversight, overseen by the failed Walz administration. Members, Minnesotans are already dealing with higher taxes, higher costs, and billions of dollars lost to fraud and programs meant to help people in need. The last thing we should be doing today is suspending the rules to rush through another $40 million program without the safeguards Minnesotans deserve. I urge members to vote no.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, it's hard to even measure the economic and social impact of Operation Metro Surge. For months, federal agents descended on our communities, carrying out aggressive operations in the daylight, invading homes without warrants, arresting Minnesotans without due process, assaulting them or threatening them with pointed guns for asking questions. They have also intentionally targeted our black and brown neighbors in systemic racial profiling. Don't take my word for it. A decision last week by a Trump-appointed judge found compelling and troubling evidence of racial profiling. He wrote that ICE had clearly authorized stops based on ethnicity or race without reasonable suspicion that they were violating immigration laws. In plain English, that means that ICE agents were told to stop black and brown people in our communities. One of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit was a Somali American young man who was on his lunch break. When he was stopped by ICE, he repeatedly said, "I'm a citizen," but they refused to look at his ID and took him into custody. A non-white constituent of mine was stopped while jogging around the lake and asked to show his papers, as if Minnesotans are now expected to carry papers while jogging. I guess only if you're brown. Minnesotans were door-knocked by federal officials and asked to point out their non-white neighbors, asking our neighbors to racially profile one another. Off-duty police officers were even stopped by ICE. The Brooklyn Park police chief noted that this had happened to their officers and that every person who this had happened to was a person of color. Local law enforcement felt the need to speak out to try to regain trust of the community and show that they didn't condone this behavior. My own mother-in-law is an immigrant and was afraid to leave her home during the height of Metro surge. The times she had to go out, such as to a doctor's appointment, she carried her passport out of concern that if she was stopped, they wouldn't be able to understand her accent when she said she was a citizen. We've heard from GOP leadership that this is a choice, that individuals chose to stay home. Given this intentional campaign to intimidate and harass our black and brown neighbors, to say that immigrants had a choice in this is deeply insulting. If you are afraid you're going to get picked up because of the color of your skin, that is not a choice. Folks wanted to work but could not. Folks want to pay rent and have jobs that can support them paying that rent, but were forced to stay home. This bill is the least we can do to try to keep tenants in their homes and to prevent further economic hardship. It would help landlords too, if you're not sympathetic to the tenants, who will come under significant strain if no assistance is available. This bill had bipartisan support in the Senate. I hope it will in the House today too. I urge members to vote green to show that we can undo some of the harm inflicted on our communities by Operation Metro Surge.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
You're on.
Baker votes no.
Baker votes no. Carroll.
Carroll votes aye.
Carroll votes aye. Fogelman.
Fogelman votes no.
Fogelman votes no. Frederick.
Frederick votes aye.
Frederick votes aye. Gilman.
Votes no.
Gilman.
No.
Gilman votes no. Hicks.
Go ahead. Hicks votes aye.
Hicks votes aye. Jones.
Jones votes aye.
Jones votes aye. Keeler.
There you go. Keeler aye.
Keeler votes aye. Kosnick.
Cosmic no.
Kosnick no. Kreshaw.
No.
Kreshaw votes no. Lee F.
Lee F aye.
Lee F aye. Liebling.
Liebling aye.
Liebling votes aye. McDonald.
McDonald no.
McDonald votes no. Purcell.
Purcell aye.
Purcell votes aye. Quam.
No.
Quam votes no. Rarig.
Burke votes no.
Rarig votes no. Ryer.
Ryer aye.
Ryer votes aye. Smith.
Smith votes aye.
Smith votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail.